Welcome back, you filthy exiles, and I am finally home from work, and I decided to ask the question, what is the state of the league for point 3? And I gotta say, it's probably the best I've seen the numbers. There's actually a really jagged spike in the player numbers, which is wild. It's not behaving the same as the previous leagues from what I can see here, and we'll talk about that in a moment. I thought I'd also cover off on a few other things. So, for example, what are the current metas? We're in about week 4 of the league, and obviously there's a bit of meta shift. The predominant meta is still Deadeyes. They're still very strong, but there's a ton of other really strong builds out this league, so obviously we're going to talk about that in the top 5. Anyway, this should be just a relatively quick and interesting little video, just to run through, and if you guys want to see me do this more often, I'm happy to do that. But yeah, anyway, let's get into it. And also, if you're not subbed to the channel already, make sure you consider clicking that button. But I'm not going to hold you up too much with that. Let's get into the video. Okay, so to kick this off, the big thing that we can see is in the retention of player numbers. Now, it appears with the amount of changes that were made to the game, obviously with the much more laxed approach to the skill gem, support gem changes and things like that, there has been a significant uptick in the amount of consistent play time. The big thing here is actually looking at the end of the graph, and I'll show it on the screen there. You can see that the player drop-off hasn't been as rapid, and actually the player base is increasing over the last 4 to 5 weeks. This is actually a really good sign because it indicates that even though with the lack of endgame content in areas, the game is actually holding up at this point, and there tends to be a fair bit of player retention as a result of this. And it's also probably because of a number of other things like Abyss League being added into the game. Obviously, with the new inclusion of new uniques, crafting is much more improved than what it was previously. All these things are actually leading to people coming and staying for longer instead of just doing a 1-2 or one and done build. People are actually wanting to play different builds. And I think this is really indicative of the change in, I guess, we talk about the vision topic here. But as an overall, like, I'm very positive about the changes and very positive about Path of Exile 2 moving forwards as a result of the changes in this point 3 patch. I expect that if they follow this trajectory, this will actually result in the best possible outcome for the game. And like, even myself, like, I just want to try different builds and try different stuff constantly. And I'm like, you know, we're probably 3 weeks off or 4 weeks off a Path of Exile 1 announcement. And I'm actually maybe going to find it a little hard to go back to PoE 1 for the first time ever at this point in, like, what, 6 or 7 years now. And that's a really good sign that PoE 2 is scratching that ARPG itch that we all want it to scratch at the end of the day. So the player numbers are looking really good. Now, in the next deep dive, we actually look at the hard player peak numbers here. And what we can actually see is really interesting. So we know the league dropped in about August, right? And that's when we hit 352,000 peak players, according to the Steam charts. And the average player base increased. Now, that bleeds over the cutoff moving into September, which we're in now. And then obviously we're getting into October, so we'll have another full month of data. It's actually like a 2-month, and this happens on league starts, but if we have a look at the previous league in April, which was the dawn of the hunt, and then we go into the May numbers, we can see like an absolutely enormous drop-off. Now, what we're actually seeing is a pretty significant like uptick gain. And if we have a look back at the previous chart that we were looking at, we're looking at a daily average of about 120,000 players that we could see. So like the game is actually attracting more players to retain and stay for longer. And that could be because some of the build, I guess, methodologies and or practices are a little more casual than in Path of Exile 1, for example, and definitely significantly better than point 2. I think point 2 is actually a really bad baseline comparison league. Like point 1, you can't really look at point 1 seriously because the game just wasn't anywhere near where it needed to be. Point 2 was where they tried to continue with the original approach from point 1, and it didn't really hit. I think point 3 is a real turning point in Path of Exile 2, and I haven't yet done this video because I wanted to give it enough time to actually be able to digest things, but I think this is the point where Path of Exile 2 actually becomes what it needs to be, and it is that it's starting to reach that PoE 1.5 sort of range between what Path of Exile 2 was when it came out to what Path of Exile 1 is, and I think that's the sweet spot where it needs to be. It's not like, you know, we have issues with one-tap builds and stuff like that, and that's something that I don't really agree with, and that's going to result in a lot of power spiking over the years to come. if it's not addressed in the next few patches before point 1 comes out, obviously 1.0. But, you know, there's a lot of really good positive things that are coming into point 3, which if they continue with, obviously Act 4 is fantastic, and even the interludes was a really good inclusion. But I think if they continue on the path with how they're designing character builds and things like that to work mechanically, I think the game's moving in the best possible direction. Obviously, there are still skills that need to be balanced. There's a fair bit of balances, and overall, there's glitches and all the rest of stuff that comes with an early access game. But it really does feel like the package is coming together, and we haven't even seen like half the classes yet, which is even crazier. Like the amount of content that's going to be in this game is absolutely nuts. Like we don't even have axes or swords or even traps yet. Who the hell knows what's going to come out of traps and mines and things like that? But anyway, and obviously now we have the Isle of Kin, which is alluding to Delve coming into the game, and I'll be saying I will be specializing in Delve like nothing else. But that being said, yeah, the player numbers are really starting to show the best possible outcome for Path of Exile 2. And it's good to see. Like, we want this game to succeed. It is by far the best ARPG, you know, moving into becoming the best ARPG out there. There's definitely things in Path of Exile 1 that still separate it, but I think as time continues, it'll become clear that people will move away from Path of Exile 1. And this is me saying it as, you know, an avid PoE1 lover. I think even for me, moving forwards, moving to Path of Exile 2 was a really good shift, because what I'm seeing is a game that I really enjoy logging on and playing now, as opposed to what it was in point 2 and point 1, and that's reflected in the numbers that we can see here. Okay, so as far as the metas that we have at about the week 5 mark, it's not surprising. Obviously, Deadeye is number 1. If you're a Lightning Arrow player, this is just the go-to. Interestingly, Blood Mage is number 2. I can understand this because from a crit stacking, life stacking spellcaster standpoint, Blood Mage is just the best for that. The Invoker is number 3. Yeah, it's pretty clearly like Invoker with like Eye Strike or like Fall of Thunder and stuff like that. Really, really strong. You can one-hit T4 Pinnacles. Lich, mainly the Last Lament build was one that's probably popped this one off the most, but or like, you know, dot builds essentially. And then Stormweaver is number 5 on the list, which I guess isn't surprising, but maybe is a little bit surprising. Beyond that, Titan's actually number 6, but we don't include it because it's top 5, right? Titan by far, I think, is my favorite ascendancy in the game now, closely followed by Smith at Katava. But yeah, as an overall, the meta is not surprising. These are obviously really high front load damage, high octane builds, but there's absolutely tons of builds in the game now, which is fantastic. And there's builds being found every single day, which is even crazier. Okay, so for the Deadeye, the obvious one here, and I actually find this somewhat problematic, is the fact that, like, well, obviously Herald of Thunder is used on every Lightning build in existence. But basically, it's Lightning Arrow and Lightning Rod. Now, obviously, for anyone who's seen all the videos about this build on the, yeah, pretty much anywhere you look, yeah, it's really, really strong. It's probably going to be getting nerfed at some point. But I think they don't touch it because, like, it's a very good entry-level build. It's like what RF used to be in Path of Exile 1, basically. Look, it is a good build. It's probably the, you know, A1, like, go-to number 1 build in the game because it is so very, very strong. But also, that being said, it sort of poses a bit of a problem for the Ascendancy, and that's because there's like no point to play any other build on the Deadeye unless you really want to play it. And it's like the rule of cool plays into or comes into effect then. And like I've always been one for that's the best policy for Path of Exile, but obviously a lot of people go for high, you know, efficiency. And yeah, so like more power to you. I've got no beef against Lightning Arrow. At the end of the day, like it works. It's a really good build. But yeah, this is probably a little bit of a problem with the balance in the game at the moment, and I can see this changing into the next league as they sort of rebalance skills a little bit better. But that being said, pretty much Lightning Arrow is the go-to. I had a quick look through the time machine there, and obviously Whirling Slash with Twisters, probably one of the next builds that sort of pops up with this, and Explosive Shot and Explosive Grenade as well pop up with Gas Grenade. Outside of this, there's not really a very big spread of other skills being played. Like, there are some Tempest Flurry builds where people are playing, like, unarmed and things like that. You know, that's actually very much another build that's very popular on this. So, Tempest Flurry with Hollow Palm technique. And that's probably like the third build down or the fourth build down on the list for the Deadeye. So again, like super strong, uses evasion, quite tanky. There's a fair few players playing it too. I think like Hollow Palm is just like, the go-to as well. And we'll definitely see that on the Monk with all the players that are playing it. And obviously with the inclusion of Thunder Fist being added to the game as well. But as an overall, that's pretty much it for the first Ascendancy class, which is the Deadeye. Okay, so the next ascendancy on the list is on the Blood Mage. Now, interestingly enough, like Spark is the go-to at 60%. Sigil of Powers supporting that with Orbistorms, Arc, and whatnot. As we sort of go down, obviously we've got Comet builds that come into effect here. This is one of the best things about Path of Building, by the way. And so people are rocking Comet builds, which is very interesting. So if we go into this, we can basically see what this player is playing. Wrathpith, which is pretty like, that's pretty much the go-to there. So it's actually running a Comet build, which is really interesting, like straight up Comet. But yeah, there's a fair few builds that tick around in that nature like that. So Spark Comet is actually a standalone build. Obviously Ember Fuselage is also played very commonly on the Blood Mage as well, and that's also proccing like Black Flame Covenant that we can see here. And there's a lot of instances where we have that going on. Some of the damage stats on these builds is actually quite good. But yeah, again, Wrathpith, Chaoms, obviously the inclusion of the new Darkness Enthroned. We're getting a lot of movement speed on that too, so Ember Fusillade, and then basically doing a ton of damage with that. That's actually a pretty wild build. But yeah, there's some really interesting build combinations coming out. But yeah, so we look at like Ember Fuselage, Spark, Comet, some of the other things, Fireball, Lightning Bolt, Lightning Warp is definitely in because we've got the Spellslinger setups now. And then, yeah, we go down to like Frostbolt, Living Bomb, and all that sort of stuff as the lower level of the builds. As an overall, like this class has a fair bit of variation as we go through. We're obviously seeing some other things like Bone Cage come into effect. That's very high damage for Bone Cage. But yeah, this would be like a very varied class because crit pretty much works across the board on everything. Bone Cage at 10 million DPS is absolutely effing wild. With Trample Toes, obviously, of course, like has to have Trample Toes. But yeah, anyway, that's the Blood Mage. Definitely a very, very interesting ascendancy at that. Okay, so for the Monk or the Invoker more so, because Acolyte of Chayula is just, again, like even after the changes that they made to the Ascendancy, its kit just lacks compared to the Invoker. Pretty much two builds stand out here, one being Ice Strike and the other being Falling Thunder or Stormwave. That's pretty much your go-to for monks, to be honest with you. Like, there are other builds that you can run in them, but Tempest Flurry and Ice Strike and Falling Thunder. Obviously, Twist is another option that you can run, and you can proc Lightning with that as well. That tends to be one of the other builds that's popping up here. But these are pretty much the go-to builds. You can do an absolute metric ton of damage with Ice Strike or either, well, basically either or. And obviously, the other big thing here is there are an exceptional amount of Hollow Palm builds that exist in the listing as well, which is pretty funny because it's pretty crazy. In fact, 58% of the classes are playing that are in in PoE2 Ninja are of an unarmed variety, which is pretty funny. And then we have 3% playing Bow and Quiver, which is really interesting. That means there's some Lightning Arrow players in here. But yeah, that's it for the Monk. Monk is like way straightforward compared to other classes. Okay, so two standout builds on the Lich. Like, there are some other various ones which pop around, like Incinerate, which is right here, which is very, very strong and very tanky. But the two predominant ones, based on what I can see, is number one, Essence Drain and Contagion, obviously is one of the biggies here. Galvanic Shards, and also, our configuration with the Last Lament. So Last Lament's like played on 31% of builds. If we have a look at the breakdown of the actual weapon configurations, which tells us a lot about the types of builds that are being played, 38% are playing wand or focuses. Crossbows are about 31%, and the other wildcard one here is minions as well work on the Lich. So about 15% are playing minion sort of setup with either a scepter or focus or scepter or shield. And we can definitely see that's obviously shock burst rounds, galvanic shards, all that sort of stuff is the Last Lament build in play. And then we've got Essence Drain, some Unearth, and then, yeah, got a little bit of Chaos Bolt there. You don't see that very often. But yeah, it's pretty much all the same sort of setup. So it's a very high DPS Chaos Bolt, and that is a lot of energy shield right there. So yeah, pretty much like 3 key builds, which is ED Contagion, a Last Lament, Shock Burst setup, and or Minions is pretty much the go-to for the Lich, which is making it one of the builds that sort of specialize in that area. Obviously, Explosive Shot too exists, but not as commonly on this configuration. Okay, and finally we have the Stormweaver. So obviously the big one here is Spark and Arc, and Comet as big damage dealing skills being used on these. Pretty much most of these builds are running Chaos Inoculation as well that we can see. These are in the upper end of the builds though, obviously not always the most representative of example. One focus setup, so you know that we're basically just maxing out spellcasting. If we have a look at all the different setups here, so obviously Elemental Weakness is played in a lot of scenarios. Mana Tempest is used to obviously proc up a ton of damage by standing on top of it. And then, yeah, we've got Lightning Warp Spellslingers with like Ball Lightning, Comet, all that sort of stuff coming into effect. And that tends to be the biggest like sort of setup here. Like Firestorm, things like that aren't very high on the ladder. Arc is at like 69%. And then Lightning Conduit and Spark and all that sort of good stuff. So that's basically what people are playing on Stormweaver. It's just a very strong setup, so obviously people are going to gravitate towards it. But yeah, it's a very like one-trick class at the moment, or ascendancy in that respect. But then again, many of the classes have like one sort of notable build, but there is quite a lot of build variety nonetheless. Okay, and that's it for this sort of roundup for I think week 4 or 5. I think we're in week 5 of the league. As far as like what I think about Path of Exile 1 sort of coming into the foray, I reckon we're like 2 or 3 weeks away from an announcement for that, because we're getting to the point where we'll get our, was it 3.27 league announcement coming soon, based on the 4-month cycle that we're on. So it'd be interesting to see what they do. It'd be really good for them to implement the new trading mechanics in Path of Exile 2 and PoE 1. But then the question really begs is, like, going back to PoE 1 going to feel as good now? Because PoE 2 is feeling pretty good, and it's going to be very hard to rip oneself away, because like even going through and doing this video, there's so many builds that I want to try, that I want to do my own take on and things like that. Or that I'm getting ideas from as I go through. That could be really cool as new skills and new things are added to the game. We also don't know if they're going to do any mid-league patches at this point, which is going to add content into the game. But yeah, anyway, that's my take on it. Now, if you guys want to see me do a video going through my thoughts on the 0.3 patch, let me know in the comments below. More than happy to do that video. I want to focus on the more positive side of things, because I think we're getting past the point where all the internal squabbling and arguing in the community needs to sort of just die down a bit now, and let's just enjoy the game for what it is. There's definitely some blaring issues, but now we're moving into the territory of this is now just a general patch issue and improvement over time. I think PoE devs now know where the game needs to sit to get the best player feedback and the best player engagement. And so we should see from all the things discussed here that all these things will sort of continue to improve as new classes are added to the game. In particular, I'm super excited for the Templar being added to the game and the Marauder, because I really want that axe attack from the Executioner. But anyway, we're getting a bit off topic there. Anyway, if you like this video, don't forget to like and sub to the channel, and I will see you guys on stream a little bit later. I'm currently leveling up my warrior at the moment, and we're going with a Sunder Earthshatter build, which is probably going to be very, very powerful and one-hit T4s, or nearly one-hit T4s. That's the plan at this stage. Anyway, I'll see you guys later on, and have a good one.